the Everything But Politics podcast.
Welcome back to another edition of the Everything But Politics podcast. Today's episode is one I have been looking forward to since it was scheduled. This man is the epitome of the word athlete and one of the most iconic lacrosse players to ever take the field. Greg Gurenlian, welcome to the Everything But Politics podcast.
Thanks, guys. I'm excited to first thank you for that wonderful intro. That made me feel great. I needed that today. But I'm excited to be on here with you guys.
Awesome. And I guess, Greg, I'm fascinated by lacrosse. I'm curious about, going back to your upbringing, how you initially got started with lacrosse. And full transparency, we're some Midwest boys. So growing up, lacrosse wasn't really the thing. It wasn't the sport everyone was jumping on. It was more basketball, baseball. So I'm excited to learn more about, lacrosse in general and your career within it.
Yeah, the Midwest is blowing up. In fact, one of my roommates at Penn State, his father was a Penn State linebacker, Matt Radisick. He's from Kansas City originally. So, I played with some Midwestern guys, and there's some really serious talent come out of there now. So it's grown a lot. But as far as lacrosse goes for me, it's interesting. I'm a severe oddity in the sport. I've always been a little bit of an outlier, and to be honest, I've kind of felt a little bit on the outside, even though I'm in the middle of it. I started playing lacrosse my freshman year of high school, and the reason I started playing lacrosse was because I'm from Philly. Originally, I went to Springfield in Delaware County, where a bunch of lacrosse legends have played, and I grew up idolizing lacrosse players, but I never played it. I played baseball, and all of a sudden, I begged my parents my freshman year. I was like, please let me play. All the cool kids play it. And really, the only reason I wanted to play was because the cool kids played lacrosse. And if you walked around with the varsity shorts on, you were the man. And I started playing lacrosse because I wanted to make friends. And my first year playing it was really, really tough because anybody who's ever watched lacrosse, you might think it's easy because you're like, you just hold the stick, you run past everybody with the ball, and you put it in the net. But your ability to run without dropping the ball is so limited if you don't know how to cradle and make the stick a part of your body. So if you're not honed in with the stick, and this is what I appreciate about the game of lacrosse, is if I can't catch and throw and I can't run and cradle and protect my stick, I'm literally worthless. I could be Usain Bolt, wouldn't matter. So what I quickly picked up was this is a really hard sport to figure out. And it was humbling because I was around guys who've been playing since they were like 6 years old. So for me, getting made fun of every single day at practice was not something I was used to. I was a natural athlete. I'd been doing karate since I was 6. I wrestled, basketball, baseball, soccer, everything. I had natural athletic ability. So this was very humbling for me. And I remember that I was towards the end of the season, I was like, I like this game. But I didn't know how to catch and throw. I sucked. So this was the first team sport that I played because I didn't play football that I was allowed to hit it. So all I did was run around and try to earhole people. So even though I was about 130 pounds soaking wet, the varsity guys would watch our games and they would make fun of me and they'd be yelling from the sideline like beast because I couldn't catch and throw and I was trying to hit everybody. So that's how I got the nickname. Even my best friend started calling me Greg Beast because it was a joke. And then I was going to quit. And I remember the last day of practice, I was going to tell the coaches, thanks for everything, but I was done. And my assistant coach, Rick Johnson, put his arm around me out of nowhere, right after sprints, put his arm around me. He goes, I know this has been a tough year for you, but I promise that if you stick with this sport, you're going to light the world on fire. And I remember getting back in the car with my parents on the way home being like, this guy believes in me this much. I can't let this man down. So then I just trained my ass off, practiced every single day. I was the weird kid at parties who had his lacrosse stick. Fell in love with the idea of taking the jobs of the guys that were making fun of me all the year before. And then it just took off from there. Once I figured out the stick, I could catch and throw, man, then I was golden. And then I found my niche. I was good at faceoffs. I was naturally good at it because of my wrestling background. Next thing I know, I'm getting recruited. Then I go to play at Penn State. When I committed to go to play at Penn State, I knew nothing about lacrosse at Penn State. I had no idea how good their team was, nothing. All I knew was my whole family on my father's side went to Penn State. It was the Penn State football. I grew up. I could tell you every Penn State quarterback since 1990. And it was my dream school because they had an amazing kinesiology program, and I wanted to initially be a gym teacher. So it lined up perfect for me. So I just used lacrosse as my ticket to go there. Then I got better. and then I set a bunch of school records, and then all of a sudden I got drafted into the pros in 2006. Played pro, ended up playing for 14 years. Played for Team USA for 10. Set a whole bunch of records. Blew my knee out in 2011. When I did that, I sat down, and at the time I was a full-time strength coach as well. And I said, I'm going to apply biomechanics to the faceoff position. So I did that. But then when I came back, all of a sudden I was 10 times better because I was playing the angles. So I started teaching other kids what I was doing. And then all of a sudden they were kicking everybody's ass. So we started a company called the Faceoff Academy. And then that took off. So I sold my strength training business, became a full-time FOA coach. Now we have about 39 coaches that work for us nationwide. We only hire guys that we've personally coached. And that's become my full-time gig. So I teach face-offs, I advocate for face-offs, I train face-offs, and that's what I've done ever since. So it's been a wild ride in the sport of lacrosse for sure.
No kidding. And Greg, when you were at Penn State, what year did you realize that you could be drafted and you were good enough?
It's funny you asked that. So my first 2 years were like, up and down. And then all of a sudden my junior year, I just took off. And I was second or third in the country in face-off percentage. I was all conference. I had all this stuff. And at the beginning of my senior year, one of the first practices of the year, I remember coming to my locker after practice, and there was a letter in there from Major League Lacrosse, and it was basically an invite to come to the combine. I used to do a training combine and a draft. I was like, holy crap! I didn't know I was that good. So then I went for it. And in my pro debut, I scored 4 seconds into the game, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be a pro. So at every level that I've been at, the same thing happened the first time I got a college letter. My dad's like, you got a letter from Penn State? I'm like, what? Like every time it's happened in my life, I wasn't expecting it. So it's been crazy.
Wow. And I'm not familiar with how like the drafting goes for lacrosse. Similar to like college basketball and football, basketball you can go right away, football 2 years. Is there an eligibility, or can you leave whenever in college?
Great question. No one's ever asked that because it's not worth it financially to leave early to get your degree. So just so you have an idea, when I came into the league in 2006, Major League Lacrosse's max contract was $16,000. And that never changed from 2006 to 2016. And I was an MVP of the league in 2015, and I made like 13 grand. But what I did do is I leveraged my popularity within the sport to start our Face-Off Academy. So even though it built the pressure, it made it a more viable thing. So I could be full-time lacrosse, even though I wasn't getting paid that much. Now, Premier Lacrosse has bought the MLL. Premier Lacrosse League is on ESPN. It's all over the place now. Those guys, the minimum contract is 25 grand, and some guys are making close to 100. So it's become much more lucrative for guys to be full-time lacrosse than it used to be.
And back then, did a lot of these guys have to take on other jobs?
Oh yeah, they still do. I mean, if you're happy making 50 grand, that's fine. But most guys used to be in finance, and then on weekends they play lacrosse. And now most guys are full-time lacrosse, meaning they're either a head coach at a private school, they're a college coach, they run a clinic business like I do, or a club program, which the club programs in this country are very lucrative. So they all have another job. But most guys now stay within the lacrosse world because there's a lot of different ways to make money.
You said there's obviously more money being invested into the sport. Where is this money coming from exactly?
Well, I mean, when you talk about the baseline, like for instance, our clinics, we have different tiers, right? So if they're a kid that likes to learn how to play lacrosse and face off, $50 a week, they come to our weekly draw days and they train with us. If you're a kid who wants to go to our national showcase and you want to get recruited, that costs $750. If you're one of the best juniors in the country and you want to compete in our I-95 Cup, that costs $800. There's overnight camps that cost anywhere from $600 to $1,000. So unfortunately, I laugh about it because now I wouldn't have been able to afford playing in this sport. My dad was an electrician. My mom was a school librarian, and there's no way I could have paid $1,000 to go to an event for a weekend. So it does give me a little bit of pause. And we are at FOA, we are actually going to be changing gears soon and going more towards a smaller price point for younger kids to try to grow the game more nationwide.
Nice.
But the money right now is still in all of that recruiting stuff, and it's wild, it's crazy, and it's exhausting. Now, when you talk about the pro league, the money comes from the fact that they're backed by huge financial backing. Joe Tsai, Wayne Gretzky, Kevin Durant, they're all guys that are invested in the PLL. ESPN contract, so they're on all platforms. You can watch every single game, whether it's on TV, on ABC, ESPN, or on their iPads. So there's a lot of ways to see it now, which only brings in more endemic sponsors. So there's more money to give.
Gotcha. And can you explain to our listeners what the difference is between the PLL and the MLL?
Sure. So Major League Lacrosse was a franchise-based single entity model. Franchises were part of the league, and the league owned half the franchises. There were individual franchise owners, but they were still giving money back to the league. There was a player pool. You were playing 16 games a year throughout the summer. The games were, it's different than college. There was a shot clock. There was a 2-point arc. It was much more fast and exciting, but it was grueling and you didn't get paid a lot of money. The PLL really treats the guys like pros. They have full-time staff, but the biggest difference is it's a tour-based model. And they barnstorm, and they go from city to city. Every single team plays every single weekend, and they rotate on the schedule. They only play 10 games a year, but they make it an entire event for an entire weekend. So it's like, there's a player village and merchandise and all that stuff sold. They put way more effort, money into the media. So as you guys know, content is king. So they are all over Instagram and Twitter and TikTok and YouTube. So they do a really good job of covering it. They cover the players like they're pros, and they try to promote the players like they're pros. So the promotion of the game is at a much, much higher level. And even the production value of the games on ESPN is way higher than it ever was when you were watching it on a potato when I was playing in the MLL, fuzzy screen and all that stuff. So, they've done a much better job. They've also made the field shorter. They've made it even faster. So if you're like a real lacrosse fan, it's hard to watch sometimes. But if you're like a new person to lacrosse, it's probably cool to watch because it's very fast paced.
And for this tour aspect of it, is a good comp, the PGA Tour or something like that, that's weekend based, new city, new event.
Yeah.
Is that a good comparison?
Yeah, and it's brilliant because what you do then is you cut costs down, right? So instead of having 10 teams where they all have their own GM, they all have their own staffs, they all have their own trainers, they all have now you have one group, right? You have one overall, here are all the trainers, all the media, all the cameras, all the officials, everybody's in one city at a time. So you only need one group of them. And the teams go. Now, so what they're doing now is they are actually working their way out of that single-based, tour-based model, and they are creating franchises now. So they're now putting the teams that are in the league into the home cities. The only difference now in this segue phase is that each home city is going to host a weekend of PLL. So it's still tour-based, but each team has a home weekend where they'll play a doubleheader. And they're eventually going to look to selling 2 franchises and then spread it back out. So they're working their way out towards that.
That's awesome.
And
Yeah.
Greg, obviously you're still extremely involved. You do your Rise Up podcast during the year. Do you go to a lot of the games?
What's funny is I would have liked to. I feel like either people are getting a little bit tired of my voice or the league just doesn't like being told that they're not right all the time sometimes. So I do get ostracized a little bit because I get a little bit on the soapbox. In the NBA, Stephen A. Smith, spouts his opinion. The NBA isn't going to shun him, because any press is good press. Mm-hmm. It's not that way right now in lacrosse. Lacrosse isn't big enough. So for me, I've actually considered maybe taking a step back from doing the podcast and stuff, and just kind of sticking to training kids and doing my thing, because even though I do know there is a good following for what we do, I feel like my voice isn't as welcome as I would like, especially when I'm pointing out things that I think could be better.
And do you hear from, is that your opinion, or do you hear that from the people involved in the lacrosse league?
So the thing about lacrosse is it's so small
mm-hmm.
that you can't say or do anything without everybody knowing. I hear everything that's said, whether it was important or whether it was meant to be said to me or not. So the writing's kind of on the wall. But I also think for myself, I have 2 kids now. My business is very busy. For me to continue to worry about being and doing the podcast and kind of pushing lacrosse and everything, I feel like lacrosse is in good hands. I feel like the PLL is doing fine. Everybody's doing their thing. For me, it's more about, can I be home with my kids more often? Can I have, can my business continue to do its thing? So I think for me, as much as I do love the sport, I feel like sometimes the sport doesn't love me back. So I might as well take a step back and just kind of be a family man a little bit more and be a businessman a little bit more. So we'll see. The game of lacrosse has been a very up and down for me, just because, like I told you, I don't fit the mold, right? I'm not a private school kid. I didn't come from money. I didn't pick a sport when I got recruited. I didn't pick a team based on their program or their history. So everything about me is weird. Plus, I'm a face-off guy, which is a very weird thing for anybody who knows anything about lacrosse. Face-off guys are constantly under attack for our position because it's so weird compared to all the other positions. So I feel like I just should probably just stay in my lane and do my thing.
And obviously you train and mentor so many young lacrosse players. Have you gotten your kids into lacrosse yet?
So I've always been hesitant to do that. Like I said, the game of lacrosse has given me a lot, and I love the game of lacrosse. The sport of lacrosse, the industry of lacrosse, and the people in it are exhausting. And I've seen how people act at some of these youth tournaments. I've seen how ridiculous people can get, screaming at each other, fights on the sidelines, kids being poached from one team to another. We had some kid, a college coach runs a club program out in Denver, and a kid decided to leave that team and go play for another team. And the coach is like, that kid's dead to me. And you're like, dude, that's somebody's son, man. Like, dude, chill out. So, bringing my kid into it was not something I intended, but look, how is it not going to happen, right? So my oldest son, Jax, is going to turn 7 this month, and he's been begging me to come to my weekly training. So finally I let him come. And even though the youngest kids are usually 4th grade, he hopped right in, he did it, and he loves it. So what happened that I feared happened, where now I have an emotional component to wanting to continue to be in lacrosse, because now it's a bonding thing for me and my son. So he's definitely in, man. My son is an athletic freak. My youngest son is a bruiser. He's only 2, but he beats the crap out of the 7-year-old. So we'll see what happens with those guys. Whatever they love. Whatever they want to do, they're allowed to do. The only non-argument in my house, though, is you have to do a martial art. So Jax does Taekwondo right now. I told him wrestling, boxing, Taekwondo, Muay Thai, anything you do, but you have to do some kind of martial art, because I believe a lot in it, and the discipline and the respect and also the self-confidence it gives you. So he does that.
That's awesome. And going back, to your college days, and kind of with what you were saying about the coach that made the comment, he's dead to me, yada, yada. With this new generation, you see it so much in football, this transfer portal, kids moving left and right, they don't get playing time. Like you said, discipline, there's not much discipline anymore. If you were playing nowadays and you were a star at Penn State, how do you think you'd handle the social media and the NIL deals coming in?
Dude, it's brutal. I feel so bad. It's interesting. I was listening to Joe Rogan's podcast, and Jim Gaffigan was on it. And he was talking about how, like, when his parents were like, oh, you don't know how good you have it. When we were younger, we were walking uphill and both ways, and there was, no cars or electricity, and there was no phones, and blah, blah. And he was like, you know what? This might be the first generation where I feel bad for the younger generation. Like, I'm never going to give my kids that talk. You don't know how bad you got it. Because I believe I grew up in the 90s, dude. We had it great. We had it so good because cell phones weren't a thing yet, man. And it is so tough for these kids now, because when I was growing up in high school, my entire world was the people I knew, which was my town. Maybe a kid I met in the town over from playing a sport against them. So if I didn't like somebody, I either had to deal with it or I had to say it to them. And then I had to either get punched in the face or defend myself. Now, some random dickhead from Ohio can tweet at my son one day and ruin his whole life, right? So it's just tough right now, because these kids, when they look at their world is so much bigger than the one I grew up in. So they're comparing themselves to people that they'll never meet in worlds that they'll never be in. And it's so sad. So when I look at the NIL thing, when the transfer portal happened, I was actually relieved at first, because I was like, look, these kids have no power. If I have a coach who just hates me, or I have a coach who just absolutely won't play me, and I know for a fact that I don't like it here, I have to get paperwork signed. I have to get a release. I can't go within conference. I have to go to another random school. I have to sit out of here. So kids had no power. Coaches had all the power, and they loved that. the transfer portal gave kids their power back, but man, it has completely swung in the opposite direction now. So it's like, I'm a 5-star recruit. I hate the word commit because commit doesn't mean anything now. Oh, I committed to Penn State. Yeah, okay, we'll see. 2 more days. Oh, now you're at Ohio State. Oh, now you're at Georgia. Okay. So you commit to 5 different places. Then you go to the school. Then you don't play. You don't start on day 1. So then you're in the portal. Then it's like, okay, well, where's he going to transfer to? Like, I follow this Instagram account, the transfer portal, just because I enjoy seeing the chaos. It's like every year now is a full free agency, and it's all quarterbacks going to whatever school they didn't get to start as a freshman at. And then like the Oregon situation, right? They just got a kid from Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Now their 4-star recruit who is pissed, so he's now in the portal. And it's just a mess. And then they're just picking schools based on how much money can I make. And I'm all about kids making money. I thought the NCAA was just slave driving for years. You know, oh, you're a student athlete, so we can't pay you. You guys made that term up, man. You guys are getting paid millions of dollars at these bowls, and these kids can't get a tattoo for free. Like, get out of here. So it's a problem. And I think the NCAA is at the root of it. I don't like the NCAA. And I think that the proof that they don't care about the kids is in the pudding, right? Like, they were like, oh, you can't get paid. You can't get paid. Ed O'Bannon's got a lawsuit coming. All right, you guys can get whatever you want now. And they just backed off, and now it's the Wild West because they just didn't want to get sued. So I don't know what the answer is. I think it's crazy. I feel bad for these kids because, you know, I think we're so used to growing up and looking at the way things were. We're like, oh, I miss the good old days. Well, maybe the good old days for you weren't good for other people. So, you know, just because we did things a certain way before doesn't make them right. I think most of us, depending on where you live, can agree that we shouldn't have slavery anymore. So, you know, just because we've done things a certain way, we shouldn't do them anymore. And I don't know what the answer is. Like, have you guys given it any thought? Like, is there any solve to this transfer thing? Is there a middle ground anywhere?
Well,
I don't know how you have a middle ground with all you can get everything right now in this new era. So really, it's in my opinion, it's all or nothing.
it's pretty fascinating too, because Marvin Harrison Jr. with Ohio State, there's rumors that he might stay at Ohio State because they're willing to give him $25 million, which would be what his rookie contract would be in the NFL.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that was always what we talked about. I remember when I was in college, we had a coaching, we had a sports ethics class. And we were talking about whether players should be paid. But the whole class was basically just finding loopholes in what anybody said. Right. So if they're like, well, players should get paid, how about they get paid for their merchandise if their name's on a jersey? Okay. How about you come to Alabama and then me, rich alumni, guarantees I'll buy 5,000 of your jerseys. Right. Like there's a loophole to everything. And all I really think it did was really crush any chance of there being any kind of even playing field. I feel like the mid-majors just went because all the haves just have more now. And I think, yeah, we as a Penn State alumni, I look at what Ohio State's done overnight, the NIL that them in Michigan did, the amount of money they pour into NIL, compared to Penn State is why Penn State can't beat them now. So, of course, I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr., I don't care what anybody says, is absolutely the best player in college football. Yeah. If Marvin Harrison Jr. is not on Ohio State, they have 3 losses this year. So, I mean, I would pay as much money as I needed to keep that kid for an extra year.
Well, and it's so massive in college football. How often are people transferring in lacrosse in college?
They're transferring a lot. It's not because of NIL deals, but it is because of playing time. And, I don't think kids, are on their own. There's more ways to get in trouble than ever. So a kid can throw his whole life away over one Instagram post. And, we see kids get in trouble their freshman year, their first semester, when parents are like, bye. And they're like, I'm all by myself. And then all of a sudden, 3 weeks later, coach, I'm going to go in the portal. I got kicked out of school, so I feel like, the transfer portal happens a lot in college lacrosse now. And usually it has to do with playing time or some kind of kid getting in trouble and then having it bumped down a peg or two.
And so something I'm curious about too is with the growth of lacrosse, like we recently mentioned. If you look at a map, I've recently saw this. It like parts the United States in half, and probably 80% of the universities are on the East Coast, and just D1 schools in the United States, whereas only 20% or something in that range is West Coast. At the beginning of the podcast, we mentioned East Coast dominance in the game of lacrosse. And with schools like Johns Hopkins, Boston University, Penn State, you could see that Eastern dominance over there. When it comes to expanding out west, like I said, we're Midwest. It wasn't that prevalent. You said it is, and you're seeing the growth. Where are you seeing the growth? As you head, you're obviously out east. As you look further west, where are you seeing that?
So there's a huge financial component to lacrosse, right? It's just like hockey. It's expensive as hell to play. But what you see through the pattern of all these years is private schools, the kind of the upper echelon financial institutions have it. Then all of a sudden it trickles down. And now some of the well-off public areas have it. And then it goes further out rural. And then what happens is guys move from these areas to these areas and they start lacrosse. So in Major League Lacrosse in 2008, I believe, no, earlier than that, like 2005, went to a Western Coast. They had a West Coast conference and an Eastern conference. They had San Francisco, LA, Denver, and Chicago. And when that happened, a lot of those guys just decided to just live in those areas and play. When they lived in those areas, they started club programs. The biggest growth that we've seen in this sport over the last 10 years has been in traditionally football hotbeds. Texas, California, Florida, exploding. Ohio, exploding. Colorado, massive. The most lacrosse players registered under U.S. lacrosse in youth in this country is in the Sacramento area. Really? So yeah, so it's crazy. But it's not like UCLA is going to be like, well, you know what? There's a lot of lacrosse players around here that are 15. Let's go D1, right? It doesn't work that way. Title IX is a big inhibitor. But also there's a financial component. You don't want to be USC and start a team and you're like, okay, cool. It's going to cost you X amount of thousands of dollars to play everybody because you have to travel across the country. Women's lacrosse is easier because the teams are smaller, there's less equipment. So USC does have a team, and Stanford has a team, but it's going to take time. I think there's a lot of push from a lot of alumni. As lacrosse continues to become more and more popular in this country, you're going to see more and more alumni pushing for it. And you're going to see things that happened at Penn State with hockey. Hockey at Penn State was a club sport. When I was there, their club team was awesome. They didn't have a varsity team. All of a sudden, someone comes in and says, I'm going to donate $180 million for men's and women's hockey, and we're going to create this brand new state-of-the-art arena. Okay, well, the money's there now. So you move a couple things around, and now you have a men's and women's team. So I think you're going to have to look at places that have a Division I women's team. And then it would take, I know the Pac-12 is going away, unfortunately, but you're going to need a few of those Pac-12 historic teams to start saying, okay, we're going to go D1 in both men's and women's. And we'll see. I think eventually it'll happen. I think the SEC is going to happen before Pac-12, but you're going to see this thing happening. Like Florida is a perfect example. Florida Gators had a club, went to a Division I, and the first 3 years of their existence, they had a number 1 ranked recruiting class because people would love to go there. So that's what's going to happen. And I always said, like when Stanford gets a D1 men's program, it's a wrap, right? You can go to Stanford and get an education there, but also it's not an Ivy League school. So they're allowed to give you a scholarship and you get to live in Cali. Yes. Yeah. 100% sign me up. So we'll see, man. I don't think we're that far away from it.
And Greg, historically, what colleges are historically the best at lacrosse in college?
Depends on what era. I mean, the Ivies are always competitive. Okay. Princeton has always been one of the greatest programs. Hopkins was good. They had a run. Duke's had a run. Cuse,
Maryland,
Cuse
right?
with the Gates and Casey Powell and the Powell brothers, like that was crazy. Maryland is always competitive. But now that there's actually big time conferences in lacrosse, like when I was at Penn State, we were part of what's called the ECAC, and it was like a hodgepodge, us, Loyola, Georgetown, a bunch of random schools all together. Now there's the Big Ten, and half the Big Ten schools have Division I lacrosse. They have their own stadiums. They have their own followings. Hopkins is actually in the Big Ten, because of the financial component in lacrosse. So Big Ten is a dominant conference in lacrosse, the ACC. So yeah, I mean, there's, as you're going to see this, and that's why I believe the SEC is kind of the next foot to drop, because I'm seeing guys in my generation moving to these areas. Atlanta is becoming a huge hotbed for lacrosse. Carolina, huge hotbed for lacrosse. So it's working its way down the East Coast. And like I said, it starts generally with the private schools and then it works its way out. So, you go to Texas, Highland Park, phenomenal. The Woodlands, phenomenal. Those are really good programs that will come and beat Long Island teams in a heartbeat. So it's getting there. And I've always said, if you get the athletes that are in the South, in the Texas and Florida, you get the football mentality parents and athletes, and you introduce them to lacrosse, this shit's going to change real fast. Who's dominant's going to change real fast.
And it's fascinating to hear about the growth of a sport at such a scale like lacrosse. Like I feel like recent examples, you can think of golf since COVID, or even more dominant has really been pickleball. I mean, everyone's playing pickleball now. So to learn and hear about it from you, who's been in the industry, who's played and traveled around for the game, it's great insight, and I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah, pickleball is a very hot topic amongst dads in Westchester right now. People love getting hurt playing pickleball. For some reason, they just think, they're like, hey, I'll just play pickleball. It's like, dude, you haven't played sports in 20 years. Yeah, I'll just play pickleball. And then they like tear their ACL. You're like, dude, I told you.
Greg, I mentioned to you before we started the podcast that going through your Instagram, watching your YouTube, you are a fucking tank in the gym. You obviously put in some serious work. How old were you when you began training?
Thanks. So I actually started, my dad, my freshman year of high school, he redid the roof and we had a crowded basement and I wanted to start working out. And I was like, Dad, like, please, like, if I help clear out the basement, if I help you with the roof, can I get weights in the basement? And he's like, yeah, did it, got my weights. The initial thing, I hadn't started lifting yet with those weights when I went back to school that September. But when I got back, I was like, dude, you look bigger. What? And it turns out shoveling shingles for an entire summer, if anyone's looking for a good workout, I put on like 10 pounds. And I was like, word. So I just became enamored with the idea of this is, and I say this all the time is, as a kid, you have your parents, you have your teachers, you have your coaches, you have your counselors. Everyone's telling you what you're allowed to do all the time. Your body is yours. And you can decide whether you want to be in shape, bigger, skinnier, fast, slow. You get so that concept really sunk in at a young age for me. And I couldn't get enough. Now, did I know anything? No, I didn't know shit. So what was I doing? Obviously bro workouts, right? Because you're just reading Men's Health and you're like, oh yeah, I know everything because I read Men's Health. Then I got to Penn State. I met our strength coach, Brad Pantal. And after I spent about 6 weeks with this guy, I was like, I don't want to be a gym teacher. I want to do what this guy does. This guy's job is sick. So I was a kinesiology major. I was a total nerd about it. I lived and breathed it. I would skip like stat 200 to go sit in the weight room and pick Brad's, brain. He hired me straight out of college as a strength coach for men's, women's basketball. And I wanted to get my master's in human performance. I ended up going to New York City after I got drafted and becoming a trainer at Reebok Sports Club in Manhattan. And that's when it just really took off. Started learning Olympic lifts, fell in love with Olympic lifts. And that was really my niche, was being a trainer in the personal training world where everyone was kind of at that time, Bosu balls and, the hot word was functional training, which was like weird shit that people would do. I was over there telling like former girls that played at Harvard, like, we're going to do cleans. And it like built like everybody wanted to train with me that was serious in the gym. And I took them all out and I started a company called Bullock Strength. So I've always been about it and I've always been about learning about it. It's my first love. But the ability, the onus on you that you can do whatever you want with your body, as it's directly correlated to what you're willing to learn and what you're willing to put in, has always stuck with me.
And what's your training regimen looking like today?
Yeah, so like I said, in 2011 I blew my knee out. So right now, next Thursday, actually, I'm getting my knee scoped, getting it all cleaned out. Hopefully, I'll be able to, because I haven't been able to run without pain in almost a year. Having a treadmill delivered to our house tomorrow. My wife has been asking me about a treadmill. She wants to start doing sprint stuff. So hopefully for me, I actually want to give a shout out to Alex, who owns Landmine University. And I'm sure if you guys look at my Instagram, you've seen me doing the landmine stuff. His system is so awesome. And I'm so angry that he didn't start it 20 years ago, because the landmine has changed my life. I love the fact that I can get explosive forward intent training without having to worry about loading my back and spine. And it's the perfect thing for young athletes. So, as for me, a lot of what I do is landmine based. It's all about power. My number one focus when I've trained over the years is how fast can I move the bar? And sub-maximal loads at high velocities have always been my focus, along with mobility. And I feel like that's why I was good at what I did as a face-off guy, because everything is nervous system reaction on the whistle. And I was able to stave off a lot of injuries just because of my flexibility and mobility. So, right now, my training regimen, because of my knee, I haven't been able to sprint, which has been frustrating. But I've been able to do steps, incline walks, a lot of carries to try to get my conditioning in. And then I split it up on like a 4-day cycle. So I'll do an upper, lower, and a more of a metabolic day, and then a full landmine day. And right now I'm just cycling through that. Once I have my knee scoped, then I'll kind of reassess how I want to do it. But my goal as I get older, I'm turning 40 next year. My goal is I just want to feel athletic as long as I can. I don't need to be big. I don't need to be the strongest guy in the room anymore. My days of 600-pound deadlifts are over. All I care about is being as athletic as possible and being able to play with my kids without pain. And that's where I'm at now.
And
Awesome.
Greg, I saw like you said when you were in your 20s, you would eat like 10,000 calories a day, work
Mhm.
out 7 days
Yep.
a week. Me, someone in my 20s, like, what do you recommend? Like, is like the proper way to go about uh, a training resume that you stay athletic, but also you are getting bigger as you're getting older?
Yeah, so I mean that's a great question, and that was kind of my expertise when I was in New York City, and I'm actually going to get back into strength training where I miss training people. But if you do things explosively for short periods, I call it sprint endurance. Okay, if you do things as hard as you can for a short period of time, and you keep that rest consistent between sets, you're going to strip fat, and you're absolutely going to gain muscle. It's impossible not to. All training is tricking your body into evolution. Now, if you don't believe in evolution, I can't do anything for you. But our body doesn't know if you're running from a lion, if you're hunting for food, or if you're lifting weights. It has no idea. All it knows is all it that has to happen is that external stress on your body has to at some point elicit a change, right? So if you're lifting heavier weights every day, eventually those fibers in your muscles have to get thicker and bigger, or else because it's survival, right? If you're eating enough calories that your body is satiated, but you're not overdoing it, and you're expending more calories than that when you're training, you're going to lose weight, and you're going to lose the right weight. So if I were to say, most guys ask the question you just asked, how can I put on a little bit of muscle? How can I get stronger, but also cut my fat? Very simple. You go either upper and lower splits. You do a moderate amount of weight, and you try to move the bar as quick as you can. You keep your rest periods around a minute, and you keep that rest consistent. The biggest thing you can do, the worst thing you can do, is bring your phone to the gym with yourself. Check your socials in between. Sometimes it's a 7-minute rest. Sometimes it's a 1-minute rest. You have to stay consistent. And I tell people, if you can stay totally consistent with the way you train, the way you rest, and the way you eat for 4 weeks, your body will start to recognize a different homeostasis, and it'll start to change. And I tell guys that 4 or 5 week mark is when you get your quote unquote mirror moment. And my job as a trainer all the time, especially in the private sector, if I'm not working specifically with athletes, right? I have a woman who maybe they had a baby like 4 or 5 months ago, and they want to start losing weight. My job is to make you focus on the work, not stare at the mirror. Because if you are focusing on the work, if you're getting stronger, your conditioning is better, you have better endurance, you're obviously going to look better too. And that's why, as a trainer, like for myself, I've never really cared about the look. The look would happen as long as I'm doing my training. If I'm powerful and fast and strong, like I'm going to look fine. So my goal is to make sure that you're focusing on the work, and then all of a sudden you're going to have the mirror moment. When you have the mirror moment, I can't keep you out of the gym after that. Then you're obsessed. So and I think also, yeah, a lot of it obviously is diet. And I like I said, I got my nickname by people making fun of me. I was an absolute ectomorph, man. I could not gain weight. And then I got to Penn State, and I told Brad, "Oh, I can't gain weight. I'm eating so much." He's like, "Okay, fine. What'd you have for breakfast?" I'm like, Well, I didn't eat breakfast. He's like, all right, you're full of shit. He's like, go to the sports. Yeah, go to the sports nutritionist and talk to Chris Clark, and she will give you a program. And based on my stats, she was like, you need to eat up to 10,000 calories a day to gain weight. She's like, you're an ectomorph. You're a furnace. Your body at 19 years old is burning calories just staring at me. She's like, you have to put in more. So I was on 2 breakfasts, 2 lunches, 2 dinners. I had to have chocolate milk and orange juice with every meal. I had honey with me sitting in class. I would go through a bottle of honey every 2 days. I had trail mix, and I would go through a gallon of ice cream a week. And guess what? I was shredded because I was 19. Those were the best days of my life. The problem was I kept eating like that when I graduated college. So I got up to like 235 at one point, and I was like too heavy for a lacrosse player. But I went from 170 to 210 when I was at Penn State.
Wow. And when you
But
were
that's a
eating,
full-time job, man.
you probably knew the plumber's first name and everything.
Yeah, man, dude, it was you had to like really time your life out. You had to time your life out, right? So but yeah, I mean, it's a full-time job, and I think, you know, my thing in life is I don't want to hear about what you want. I want to see what you're willing to do to get it. Like, I don't care about what you've achieved. I don't care about what you want. Show me what you're willing to do. And I think so many people, like in our house, I have a rule in our house. You're not allowed to whine about something, especially if you're not going to fix it. Right? I'm cold. Okay. Well, put on a sweatshirt or turn the heat up. If you're not going to do that, then shut up. Right? Same thing in life. I want to be bigger and stronger. Then why are you complaining about it? There's ways to do it. There's Google. Google will literally tell you everything, right? Or there's YouTube or whatever. You can learn how to do anything. So yeah, that's the way I do it. When I want something, man, I just stand up and I go do it.
Well, and Greg, I'm sure everyone who goes to your camps, wants to play professional lacrosse, college lacrosse. What percent of your guys actually go and play college level?
We actually have a pretty shockingly high number percentage-wise of guys who go on and play at the next level, because not everyone's going to go to Duke, right? But there's Division I, there's over 200 Division II, there's over 300 Division III schools. There's club lacrosse, which is incredibly competitive now. Because like I told you guys, when I was in high school, this many guys were playing high school lacrosse nationwide. And there were this many schools. Now there's still this many schools, but now this many guys are playing lacrosse, right? So club lacrosse has become another branch of playing college lacrosse. And we have a shockingly high percentage. And the reason we have a high percentage is, one, we take it very seriously when we train them. We're not here to just like give you cupcakes and like laugh about stuff. Like, you're coming in, you're paying a very high price because it's an investment that you plan on playing at the next level, and we're going to train you. If you listen to us, you'll do it. So we have a pretty high percentage because recruiting has become a massive part of what we do. We have an entire recruiting arm called FOA Advantage. We have 3 guys. Their whole job is to help people with their blueprint on how to get to college. Do we have plenty of guys who have the skills but not the grades? Yes. And that is generally the limiting factor. The limiting factor is not usually the skills. The kids have the skills. So, like I said, it does get exhausting because we are focusing on one position, and we have all the information and training we need to get a kid to where he wants to be if he's willing to try to train hard enough to reach his level. But I do miss the development of our sport. I want to go back and do youth clinics. I want to just have kids learn how to scoop a ground ball and pass it and then like high five them afterwards. Like, I want to get back to that because I've been doing this for so long that my gray hair is absolutely accelerated. So yeah, I mean, the fun in this sport goes away very fast. And to your point, that's usually the first question people ask is, is my son good enough to play in college? And that question is asked as early as 5th grade. And you're just like, dude, I played lacrosse, I played soccer, I played these sports because I wanted to play the sport. And unfortunately, too often, the kids are just looking at it as a way to go to college. I'm like, dude, you could just study and go to college. You don't have to do this. So hopefully there are kids out there that still want to have fun with it. I try my best to make sure it's still fun for them because the world gets too serious too early for these kids now.
And hopefully some parents are able to hear this and kind of take what you just said to heart a little more deeply.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not a secret. Adults ruin kids. Kids don't ruin kids. And I've never seen kids ruin a sporting event. I've only seen adults do it.
True.
And look, I'm lucky I've achieved what I want in life. I don't need to live through my kids. And I hope that they go on and do whatever they want. I hope it's not face-offs in lacrosse. I hope it's something cooler or different. But I think as a parent, you want your kid to be successful. You want to cheer for them. But I always tell parents, I'm like, cheer for your kid. Don't cheer against somebody else's kid. Like, you don't have to scream at the ref. We do have a shortage of refs in the sport of lacrosse because they can't handle getting screamed at anymore. And I think that's actually indicative across sports is we have lost our damn minds as adults. We need to chill out, or else all the cool things that are still left, because everything's still kind of shitty right now, the cool things that are left are going to go away if we can't freaking grow up a little bit.
Yeah, I remember over a decade ago, the Little League days, you had those same parents screaming at screaming at other parents. Nothing changes. It doesn't matter the sport, doesn't matter where you are. It's all parents are going to be parents.
Yeah, people take everything personally. It's like, dude, that ref had it out for my son. Oh, what, he follows your son on Instagram and he doesn't like the toys he plays with. What are you talking about, dude?
Yeah,
Like,
so
stop. But yeah, I think, I would love for the world to change a little bit, but hopefully if we can keep things fun as long as we can for these kids, we can get somewhere, hopefully.
Greg, I have another question about going back to your training. When you mentioned you're doing these 600-pound deadlifts, something that both Evan and myself have adopted over probably about 2 years now, is we've really incorporated things like flexibility and pliability, stretching, rolling out, using the ball. When you were deadlifting 600 pounds and pushing this serious weight, were you prioritizing these types of things?
Yeah, I always have.
That's cool.
And I attribute that to martial arts. Like we were stretching and I learned at a very young age the value of being flexible. I've never ego lifted. I've never been like, I got to do this amount of weight right now. Like my whole thing was like, I've always progressed and I've always been, I'm somebody who like, I can't possibly work out in a world where it's like, what do I feel like doing today? I need something in front of me that tells me the progressions. P90X like exploded onto the scene. It was a total eye roll movement for a lot of strength coaches because you're like, dude, there's no such thing as muscle confusion. Bullshit. Your muscles don't get confused. But if you don't have a progression, you're going to confuse your muscles into not accelerating where you want them to. And you need some type of progression, right? Whether it's load progression, volume progression, rest progression, something needs to change slightly. It's the number one law of strength training is a progressive overload. And you can apply it in almost any way you want, but something has to slightly change or else you're just going to be doing the same weights. Your body will change the first couple of weeks, then it'll adapt. And adapting and then not changing it and evolving after that is literally the worst way it threatens all your gains in general. So you have to constantly be challenging that stimulus. So like for you guys, like I don't know what your goals are, but like I love that flexibility and mobility at the forefront because you can't do anything. Whether you want to get bigger or lose fat, you can't do anything if you're hurt. So you need to take care of your engine, man. You need to be taking care of that engine, or else if the engine breaks down, you're just sitting at home and you're not getting anything done because you got to watch Netflix and like ice yourself.
Mm-hmm. And as you've gotten older, and I guess even looking 20 years down the road, do you think it's more important to have muscle or to be flexible?
You can have both. The more muscle you have, the more flexible you can be, and vice versa. I mean, look at gymnasts, right? I mean, gymnasts can literally turn themselves into a pretzel, and they're all muscle.
True.
But I think what people lose sight of is the mobility, right? Like flexibility is one thing, but the ability, like the mobility and the integrity of like your spine, for instance, right? That's not flexibility, that's mobility, shoulder mobility, right? Like these types of things, if you just worry about getting big, but you can't itch your own back, some people like that. I don't understand why you'd want to. So like for me, I think especially as I get older, I mean, nothing staves off growing old, like having muscle. Muscular density is like the number one way to stay young. But also you want to take care of that muscle. Having the muscle doesn't do anything for you if you can't move. So they really they work synergistically. And you can have both. That's why I train like an athlete, not a bodybuilder. And there's nothing against bodybuilders. I know a lot of bodybuilders and they love what they do and it's great. But like as an athlete, I want to feel like I can do a sprint and I can run in multi-direction and I can touch my toes. Like that's way more important to me, feeling explosive and nimble, than just being a hulking meathead.
Agreed.
Nothing against meatheads.
Yeah.
And Greg, before we let you go, I got a question regarding when you retired and then coming back. What made you retire initially, and then why did you come back in 2018? And then what led you to just officially calling it the season after?
Yeah, so in 2016, my first son was born, and I've always wanted to be a father. Like it's one of the biggest goals of my life. It's as weird as that sounds. And once he got here, um, you know, I couldn't just travel. So I wasn't just playing lacrosse every summer. I wasn't gone just every weekend of the summer. I was also gone 2 to 3 weekends a month or year round because of Faceoff Academy. So, for my wife, she was honest with me. She was like, look, you're gone all the time, but now we have a kid. Like, and like for me, I was like, yeah, I want to be around more because I have a son now. But so she was just like, but then I went for a training weekend with USA Lacrosse. So I thought it was going to be my last weekend with USA Lacrosse. And then we had a new coaching staff come in. Coach Danowski, Coach Amplo, Coach Tierney came in. I met them for the first time and they were like, yeah, this is going to be the coaching staff. And I was like, these guys are awesome. I was like, man, I'd love to play for these guys in the next World Games. And the next World Games were 2018. So my wife was like, look, got to pick one, man. So I decided 2017 would be my last year playing pro. I had won an MVP. I had every single face-off and ground ball record in the history of the league. I had won a championship. I had nothing else to prove. Now it's time to focus on Face-Off Academy and give myself one more good year of training so that I can try and win a gold medal. So that's what I did. I retired in 2017. I trained all off season. I made Team USA again, went out and won a gold medal in Israel. And then after I came, while I was out in Israel, I heard all the rumblings from all the guys that were like, yeah, there's going to be a new league. They're going to take over the MLL. All the guys are going to leave. They're getting better pay. They're getting medical. It's going to be huge. I was like, wow, it's cool. So I started helping them write some of the face-off rules for the league. And then I got a call from my friend Tom Schreiber. And he was just like, hey, would you want to play? I was like, dude, you're going to have to pay me enough to not get divorced if I ask my wife about this. So, we put the contract together. I came in the room and I was like, hey, sweetie, question for you. It's like, look, man, I get it. Like, you got to do it. If this is the new league, you want to be relevant. It'll help your business. Go for it. Play one season. So that's what I did. I came back. I agreed. And of course, as soon as word happened that I was going to the PLL, the MLL teams were calling me and they're like, we'll pay you $100,000 for a year to come back. And I was like, guys, where was this money when I was an MVP? If you had this money, why didn't I get paid? So absolutely not now. And I played 1 year and it was great. And I made a lot of friendships and I played for some amazing coaches and it was cool to be on TV and do that whole thing. And now, I can always look back on that and we made it to the championship, that 1 year I played. And I still had gas in the tank. I think for a lot of athletes, what you're worried about, especially at the face-off position, because it's all speed, is what happens if I just slowed down, right? And if I slow down by 5%, I'm embarrassed, right? Because you're talking the 10 best face-off guys in the world. And if you're not where you're supposed to be, you get crushed. And I don't want people to think about the last time I ever played and remember me that way, because we've all seen pros do that. So I'm just lucky. I went out with a bang, played really well in the last game of my career, and I'm very happy with the way it ended. So I did get calls for a few years afterwards. You want to come back? You want to come back? But I'm happy now. I got 2 kids. I got a job, and I still have a functioning body. So I'm going to just call it quits. Get out ahead while I can.
Awesome. Well, Greg, you are the fucking man, bro. Appreciate you joining our show and loved learning more about you and your great career.
No, thank you guys. That was awesome talking to you. If you never need anything in the future, let me know. Stay in touch because I think this is an awesome thing that you guys are doing. It's a very cool show.
Thank you. And Greg, where can our listeners find you, what you're doing, really everything you got going on?
Sure. Any social media platform, it's at GregBeast32. I have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Greg Gurenlian. It's got face-off advice on there. It's got a lot of drills, but it also has an entire backlog of strength training information. And then my strength training website is the official beastlab.com. So if people are interested in learning more about that, they can go there. So
awesome. All right, guys. Greg, thank you so much.
All right, boys. Thank you.